Welcome to Talmudic Treasures. Today we're learning Nazir page 43, which discusses when it comes to a regular Kohen, that individual, just like a Nazir, is not allowed to come in contact with the dead. However, we're more strict when it comes to a Nazir, in that he's not even allowed to come in contact with any of his relatives who had died, that he would not be able to perform the actual funeral or come in close contact with their remains. However, when it comes to a Kohen, the verses explicitly say that he is allowed to become impure to one of his 7 closest relatives, namely his parents, his children, his siblings, or his spouse, which equals 7. They are allowed, if they died, that this Kohen is allowed to become in contact with them, even though, of course, that will make the Kohen impure, which then itself shows the great sensitivity that we have, that even a Kohen who needs to serve in the temple and remain pure, however, we understand that when it comes to matters of death and the grieving process, that we're more lenient. However, there's actually an opinion, although it's an argument, that what happens if a person's father, for example, his head was decapitated. And now the question is, do we allow in that situation for the son to be able to also become impure and come in contact with his father's remains? So there's actually a verse that is interpreted that he is not allowed to come in contact with the remains in this situation. Only when the father's remains are entirely intact. However, not in this situation where his head is literally missing, or his body's in 2 parts. And even though this seems a bit difficult on the surface to understand, but we know, even though it's against Jewish tradition to typically have an open casket, there is an element of consolement among others who don't adhere to these laws to actually see the remains, and for the remains also to be in pristine physical condition, that the funeral chapel will make sure that they're dressed in a certain way, and upon seeing them in a restful state, perhaps is a form of comfort. Again, this is not something which typically takes place in Jewish funeral chapels, but nonetheless, this is something that maybe we could get some insight here, that when a person sees the remains of their relative and their body is intact, that is a different experience than knowing and seeing that your relative's remains are not. Now, it's important to make note that the Talmud here tells us that if you would be walking in the field and you would happen to see the remains, you have an obligation to do the burial. It doesn't make a difference even if you're a Kohen and typically not allowed to become impure. And certainly it makes no difference if it's your father, which you certainly would have to do the burial. It doesn't matter if, again, the body was decapitated, his head was removed. And certainly also does not matter who it is, any person. There's a principle called a mace mitzvah. So even though you don't like doing burials, you've never done before, you don't want to come in contact with the dead, we have no choice under that circumstance. There's a requirement for you to actually perform the ceremony and to make sure that their remains are taken care of. So again, this shows the sensitivity that we have, that we do not want you, while you're in the middle of the field, to start trying to find, because you're a Kohen, I don't want to become impure, so you're going to try to find someone else to do it. In the meanwhile, precious time is being wasted where the remains should be taken care of. In this situation, even you as a Kohen have to take the matter in your own hands.